Hello, folks.
Salutations. Crobe, I got your video. I will upload it forthwith.
Oh, fine, David, fine. All these requests.
I know pushing a button and typing your name is hard.
It's really difficult this early.
Just think about our friends in Japan or China.
Oh, I know. Years ago, I was managing a V team out of Hyderabad, India, and every Monday night, 10:30 p.m., had my weekly meeting with them. But I think it was like 7 a.m. for them. So I was like, I'll take the 10:30.
10:30 p.m. is when I'm at my best, you guys. If you want to meet at that time, you're going to get, the really good stuff.
I'm definitely more of a night person myself.
I have learned that there is no good time.
Then there's that.
Somebody. If it's worldwide, it's going to be awful for somebody.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, we've got a good group today. Yeah, we'll get started in just a few more minutes. We got quite a few people joining. Awesome. Probably one of our shortest agendas, but the largest group we've had. So.
I wonder if there's like a correlation there. Like, oh, it's
I'm wondering that too.
Really,
This won't be so
think
bad.
Dory's onto something. Yeah.
Next time we'll have one item and see if it grows exponentially.
I just reposted the link to the meeting notes. Hopefully that helps.
David? Okay, well, I think we've got quite a few folks now. Most of the actual TAC reps are here. So, and I see Brian is here as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So 2 agenda items today. So Brian, I'm not even going to attempt your last name this early in the morning and butcher it. So I'll let you introduce yourself. For those that don't know, Brian has recently come on as is the title executive director? Is that the correct?
Well, I the previous title GM for blockchain, healthcare, and identity, like a whole category of things. I at the Linux Foundation have handed that baton off, and because I grew attached to that title. Yeah, GM for OpenSSF.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, with that, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Brian is going to discuss the upcoming governing board in-person meeting that's happening on November 5th, when all these new fun changes are going to start happening for us. So.
Great. And I think I've met everyone here, although possibly not I'm Brian Behlendorf. You can say Behlendorf. I'm fine with that. Linus, that's that kind of thing. And I've been with the Linux Foundation for 5 years, to date leading something called Hyperledger, along with something else called the Linux Foundation Public Health. And when Jim Zemlin said there's this new thing forming here, that we're pulling together some new resources around it, I said, great, how can I help? And so that's why I'm here. And we, thanks to the hard work of many of you out there, have pulled together an amazing set of sponsoring members now for OpenSSF, which will change a little bit kind of how we operate and take advantage of a bunch of new financial resources that have come in. About 4.4 million in membership revenues, which we'll be able to spend on a core budget to go out and support many of the projects that have been started to date, as well as things that we haven't had budgets before, like marketing and having a presence at events and those sorts of things. And in addition to that, we've also, thanks to Google and Microsoft, raised 5 million specifically around Alpha Omega. And we'll continue raising some more for that. And as many of you have been involved in that process, that is starting to come together around a picture of how we appropriately resource that project and direct those funds to have an impact as anticipated in that paper. I'm committed, absolutely, as you've perhaps hopefully all heard me said, to everything that this project does from a technical basis being vetted publicly. I don't believe in a whole lot of private meetings. I don't believe in kind of heroes, with the one bright idea that I'm not the chief architect, I'm not the CTO. There's a whole lot of experts out there. In fact, we at the Linux Foundation here are really just here to channel, to think of it as air traffic control, but even that sounds terribly top down compared to what I hope really is the expertise of all of you on the TAC coming into bear on everything that we do. So I want to make sure we're also spending the money that we've raised as efficiently and impactfully as possible. And so what we're doing, so let me just play out the next few months for folks. So the Linux Foundation runs on kind of yearly budget cycles, and we seek from our governing board approval of a budget typically in the December meeting for the following year. Based only on the money that's been raised to date, so that 4.4 million, and this is separate from Alpha Omega. But that's where we will be getting approval from the governing board, is in a meeting that happens on December 5th. But the next governing board meeting is actually on November 4th. And in that meeting, I'd like to preview a draft of a budget for this new governing board that is stepping in. And also, by the way, the existing governing board will be at that meeting in November. And that'll be an opportunity to really help share with the new governing board, here's what we've accomplished as a community to date, here's what our objectives are, here's what we think success looks like over the next year. Sorry if that terribly sounds like consultancy kind of speak, but really this new governing board, they're the ones who approve a budget and in effect kind of approve kind of the broad brushes, the priorities that, Jory, David, and myself will go through as we spend through 2022. So what I'd like to seek from all of you is guidance on that budget request. And I'm not saying specifically like 100 grand for this, 500 grand for that. I'm saying both at a TAC level and then working group by working group level, because we'll go to those. I'd really love a sense from that we can share during the governing board call of what's the most important things going on today. What really can we accomplish in 2022, and then just some way of communicating what would be the kind of resources desired to be able to tackle that in 2022. And it could be funding on specific projects. It could simply be, we'll just make sure Alpha Omega works well, and then we'll be successful. It could be specifically writing some code. It could be a number of things. But we'd like to harness that together, and put it into a deck for the November 5th meeting, which means we kind of have this week and next to get that picture together. We will be going to each of the working groups, showing up. I know Jory was on the vulnerability working group call yesterday and shared this. And we'll, rely on us to kind of do the final assemblage into a deck and to try to organize it and make sense. But before then, we're going to seek for that from each of the working groups. We'd like to also understand if the TAC itself separately has a desire to have either some sort of, I don't want to say budget, but some activities of its own, or if really focusing the activities on the working groups and trying to just make sure those are as effective as possible is the right thing to do. So I come with a little bit with kind of an open picture, a brain dump, and hope that can generate some conversation. But really the focus of all of us is that November 5th governing board meeting and making sure that sets us up for an amazing 2022. Any thoughts on the above?
Thank you, Brian. That was awesome. So a couple questions. So yeah, traditionally the way that we've been kind of running this is that it's very working group focused. And so a lot of I think the aspect that what you just said, where we would kind of delegate to the working groups, but I definitely hear what you're saying. Like, is there a need on the TAC side that we want to drive something? So from the overarching kind of technical vision that we put together, are there concrete things that you'd like to see from us that we could kind of help shape that the working groups fit into? Or would you like to see the TAC itself sort of have actual initiatives that we're working on?
For one thing, I think it's wise to, in the budget that we seek to get approval for in December, keep a little bit in reserve for opportunities that emerge in 2022, right? And so, and that would be based on the TAC maybe approving a proposal for a new working group or something like that, right? So you could consider that a little bit of dry powder kept on behalf of the TAC to be able to say, that's an interesting effort, and we know it's going to take some resource to do well. So we can take that on and spend into that budget. So as a hand wave, 50 or 100K or something like that, is one thing that we could put on the table. Just brainstorming here feels about right. The second would be, and I know it's always awkward to ask parents which of their children do they like the most, which are the ones that they want to actually send off to college, and which are the others to bricklayer school or something like that. I don't even know if there is a bricklayer school, but you know what I'm talking about. But like, if there's some way of conferring, yes, this is something that we as the TAC feel should be doubled down on in 2022, perhaps even beyond what the working group asked for, or in addition to, that would be helpful as well. I don't have to ask for the opposite of that, which is no, that's something that should stay volunteer driven or stay, self-sufficient. By the way, I don't mean volunteer driven as opposed to funded. We will definitely need volunteers at every level continuing on this. In fact, that's one of my big fears about this process a little bit is if we say, oh, there's money to spend, we'll kind of shut down some of the volunteer energy. So I just want to put that on the table and say, let's make sure we don't do anything to inadvertently cause folks to feel like they don't have to volunteer or there's no role for volunteerism in what we do. But rewinding back at the TAC level, just wondering if there's a desire for, say, a reserve to spend opportunistically when things pop up, or it's some sort of expression of where they think we should be putting more resources from what the working groups ask for.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from other TAC reps if they have opinions on this. I know certainly there are some new things coming in that we've discussed around supply chain security and new working groups. But again, I think we would sort of spin those up as working groups and fund them as working groups, not necessarily TAC resources. But does anybody else have like thoughts around TAC specific things that we might need budget for? Nobody wants free money.
Going and
I know it's an awkward thing to ask.
Ryan, I would expect, I think maybe at one point TAC will go and present in some technical conferences, presenting our ideas. That's one thing I could think of.
So travel budgets and travel stipends for especially for folks who don't otherwise have those kinds of resources is something lots of Linux Foundation projects do. Something that if you felt was, I mean, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I would look to you all to come up with. So a travel budget for speakers at events. And I will say we do anticipate asking for a budget for a presence at events where we'd be able to bring our volunteers and some of our members, right? Perhaps even have like an OpenSSF branded booth at a place like Black Hat, just kind of throwing it out there. Although Black Hat's probably too soon to be able to do that because it's February, right? February, March.
Black Hat's August, the USA one, so we might have.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, so yeah, might be able to do that kind of thing. But regardless, travel budgets, even to like unaffiliated events, we don't even have a presence at for folks from the community who might not otherwise be able to attend. It would be really cool, and I think that would also help with representation with diversity as well.
There may be projects that we would want to seed. And this is not something we need to necessarily do immediately, but I guess it's worth kind of thinking about as we think about the role and structure of different organizations within OpenSSF, including the role of the TAC. So we have the technical vision and technical wish list documents where we talked about some of the big picture, like how do we actually secure the open source ecosystem? What does this look like? And this is broader, but certainly some of this is composed of the kind of bottom-up working groups that we have that have started some of these initiatives. But I think if you look at the constellation of working groups, it doesn't cover yet the full space of the things we might want to do. So given that there will be more resources now than we've certainly had before, we may wish to, as a TAC, and I would obviously defer to your view on this, Brian, but we may wish to, as a TAC, prioritize a few things that are not currently covered by like extant working groups, and perhaps to seed those efforts if we can find either sufficient volunteers and or wanted to fund specific like staff members or contractors to develop some of those things.
Well, what would be the kinds of things you don't think are currently covered? Do any come to mind? Or
I'd have to go through the wish list and think about it. But I know that the space of the things that we would ideally kind of wave a magic wand want to do to secure open source, we probably haven't fully covered that space, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that as well, Jennifer. I just wonder if would that really be a TAC thing, or would we just spin it up as sort of an incubating working group and fund it that way?
Yeah, I guess all of these things have an origin, but
yeah,
good point. The idea came from somewhere, so it might come from the TAC. Given, I guess, like I view the TAC as having a kind of overview role, right, that connects big picture kind of vision and ideas and understanding of the search space to practical things on the ground. So I just view the TAC as kind of playing that mapping and prioritization function to some degree. But again, this is probably a pedantic thing to talk about. So
but I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that we anticipate identifying funds for in the general fund is, writing documents is hard. You can take all the great ideas out of all of our heads and the sketches that we create, but turning that into content that's easy for audiences well beyond the self-selected folks who show up to consume is really a challenge. You guys have done an amazing job. The presentations at last week's KubeCon, the stuff I've been able to benefit from already done has been really, really good. But I also know there's probably more, I imagine there's more you'd like to be able to do that having a professional writer could help with, having some more graphic design work, those, like I'd love to get a certain degree of polish on the stuff that we get out there so that it gets to audiences we might not otherwise reach yet. And so I think aside from other asks that we can talk about here, I'd like to just let you know, I anticipate having some help on, call it marketing, if you will. I mean, it'll probably even be under a marketing budget, right? But content development is something I think is pretty important for us to resource and pay for.
That makes a ton of sense. I guess a natural question might be, what kinds of content are you imagining, especially like in this first year this new wave of OpenSSF, is there a specific like white paper or presentation or kind of base deck, or what specifically are you thinking would be the most useful things to do in this near term?
Yes, and presentation, like standard presentations that any of us, but more importantly, like hopefully an army of advocates can go out and like present around, especially for internal presentation decks. I found that a lot of our members on Hyperledger like wanted to have great overview, but then also like specific example slides to make the internal case at their own companies for why their own companies need to invest in this stuff. And the more polished that looks, the more, the better the actual examples in that, like the easier it was for them to make the internal case. So I know it sounds silly to spend open source project money on slideware, but like, I think it actually would help us grow the community. I think every great open source community does also need like a white paper that more or less defines like the big picture that of everything trying to come together. And there'll be lots of other stuff to hang off that, but that's and keeping that up to date as new working groups emerge and things get better and better. So those two things are pretty clear. We will have, I'd like to at least make sure we have a good stream of content in a blog that helps keep an audience beyond those who can be on the working group calls or be on the mailing list even, up to date on what's going on. And then that becomes leverageable through Twitter and LinkedIn and those kinds of things, right? Beyond that, I mean, we've toyed with the idea of a podcast. I know there's a ton of cybersecurity podcasts out there already. I'd raise that and say maybe it's worth our while. It's expensive to do that, expensive both in money to have something polished as well as time to be able to lead that. But we've got an awful lot of voices in our community that might be a good way to elevate up, and it's again a way to reach out beyond the core group. So that's just on my mind as like things to you know, and rough priorities of kind of content to create. But also I think we should really listen to when somebody from the community says, you know, I'm not a great writer, or I'm not a great, you know, podcaster or whatever, but I've got some ideas. Like we should be able to jump in and help elevate that voice in some way. So stay agile, I guess, have some dry powder to help support those kinds of things.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually really like the idea of a podcast. A long time ago, in the beginnings of this organization, there was discussions around having like panels of the TAC, you know, at various conferences and things. But a podcast would be a really great way to sort of amplify that and bring in other voices from the community that could discuss things and bring some relevance to OpenSSF and some of the things that we're working on, bring some visibility and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's a really awesome idea.
Okay.
We could even consider having like a one-day workshop that focuses specifically on like I guess we'd have to frame it appropriately to not have it be too generic, but we could, for example, do like, I guess this is a little more academic feeling, so not quite this, but like the Dogstuhl seminars in Germany, where they bring together, you know, a workshop of 30 people or whatever to focus on a very well-defined problem scope. We could conceivably do something like this at a bit larger of a scale and a bit more industrial feel around securing the open source ecosystem, where it is very focused around solving specific problems that we identify.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what the TAC feels like might be a good strategy for events for the organization. Because I think, you know, just like with podcasts, there's an awful lot of security events out there, right? Very different in tone, very different in audience. And I think we want to try to reach a lot of those. And I think it'd be worth looking at how do we have a presence, whether it's like a branded booth or it's like a track with some of our speakers, or even just a few sessions that we coordinate and really try to get our community speakers at, but embed ourselves inside the existing set of events, rather than doing our own KubeCon kind of thing. Now, I think we could do developer get-togethers, you know, kind of hackathons or hackfests, not competitions. I'm not a huge fan of the competition kind of thing, though. If one of those popped up and asked for support or something like that, maybe. But a kind of smaller focused events, bringing together our core community, or some sort of like, or supporting regional meetups in some way. I mean, those are interesting, but just kind of staying away for now, at least for this first year, from the idea of like, you know, a major KubeCon style event, just because those are so expensive. And I think we're still at the beginnings of what we're doing. But I don't have it more fleshed out than that. I think we talked about like a budget for that kind of thing to have a presence at, you know, 4 or 5 major events over the course of the year, presuming we all do get back to like at least hybrid events. It's probably a budget in the $400,000 range, and that's to be able to sponsor some of these things, which you kind of need sometimes to get sessions in, but also to have somebody actively looking for opportunities for us to get speakers, you know, to write pitches for speakers from our community to go and give talks, you know, to run almost like a speaker bureau kind of service. Uncompensated, but wherever we can, we'd get travel, you know, paid for by the host and that kind of thing. Anyways, does that strategy sound about right, or does anyone have strong opinions on perhaps a different place that we should focus?
I agree. I think getting the word out and building the brand first year, then we can have our own events later. That makes sense.
I think we can be really thoughtful as well about our audience. So Krob and I had done a talk at Black Hat USA in the summer because we were really interested in drawing the attention of security researchers to OpenSSF to contribute to the various groups and stuff. We may wish to think about doing some more developer-oriented outreach that perhaps leverages some of what David has in his edX course to offer some of the secure development basics and things like that.
I see Rob's comments about both working groups that he's a part of, having open items to figure out how to get people to conferences to evangelize the work. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Supporting advocacy and supporting travel budgets, you know, when necessary, but also content development and just pitching. You know, I mean, there's so many events. I think having somebody on our side who can be keeping a calendar of upcoming security events, and with your help in maintaining that, and just understanding, here's our pool of people who want to speak about this stuff. Here's somebody local to the event. You know, we can perhaps pitch this person to talk on this thing, having a couple standard pitches. I think that would really help get our brand out there in a very cost-effective way. And our ideas.
Yeah, I think the TAC is a great source for that too, right? To have us coordinate and know which ones are going on, and then that way Krob and his team doesn't always have to try to track every little thing. We'd be like, hey, there's a conference coming up and I think it's relevant for you guys. Do you have somebody that wants to go? And whatever we're wanting to highlight at the time, different working groups could have different influences, and the TAC could definitely help drive that. And I did not Phil's comment, totally agree with that as well.
Yep.
I mean, I've been doing a little bit of going out to conferences, going out to podcasts, and trying to say various things. But absolutely, I've added to the notes here about tracking the conferences and podcasts. Trying to identify those things to go to.
And a half-day workshop, you could even potentially charge for as a way to make it self-sufficient. Especially if there's some form of certification or accreditation to it, which, we have a training department at the LF. I know we've got the edX courses up. I think maybe that's something we could look at doing as well, as a way to make those, self-funding and do more of them, right? Let me also ask one more in one different direction, which is, having a great relationship with the research community is something I'd like to do. We could easily spend all of our budget in a day funding research projects. So I at different, university teams and that kind of thing. And I don't think that is necessarily so high leverage, but are there ways that we could apply a little bit of funding to help incentivize or recognize even just or reward or something greater connections with researchers in the field, particularly at the university level, particularly as a way to help encourage people down a career path in this domain, particularly as a way to increase the diversity in this space. Are there thoughts people have about ways that we might leverage a bit of funding in this direction?
We could do something kind of like what Google does with Summer of Code, where they offer sponsored studentships for summer to work on open source related things. We could potentially do like a sponsored research studentship or something to work on OpenSSF related projects. I imagine the success of that would depend a lot on having some well-defined deliverables and good mentorship. But one thing I would add when we're thinking about research is, especially from a security perspective, the idea of academic security research, and traditional vulnerability research, there is quite a chasm between those two things. And I think that especially when we're thinking about 0 days in open source, we might want to also think very carefully about how we wish to engage with the traditional like vulnerability research community. Because if we only think of research as academic research, we're probably going to not get a lot of vulns found or build a lot of relationship there. So we might want to even think of those two as kind of separate pillars that we want to engage with.
Yep, there are very different audiences. Yeah, and on the internship side, I know CNCF has run this. On Hyperledger, we've run this where we allocated about $125K a year to basically a set of summer projects that are $5,000 each. So not as compelling to folks in the US, but lots and lots of applicants from India and China. One of the biggest kind of limiting factors on that is both projects and the mentors willing to oversee that work, right? Willing to oversee the mentee. That's where I don't know yet what capacity we have in the community for that kind of thing. But we could certainly identify some money to get started on that next year and have start with a modest program. And if we've signed up a few more members and it turns out we have a bumper crop of ideas for projects and willing mentors, then expanding that program on a dime isn't that hard to do. It's just you want to time it for the summer break if you can. So yeah, but it was moderately successful. It's hard for me to say, hey, we got an amazing amount of output for the 125, 150K we spent each year. There were individual stories that were really good and compelling on net. It really comes down to the quality of the projects and how motivated the mentors are. So if that's there, then I'll put some in the budget for that. But that if we'd want to do that, that's going to take a lot of work. I see, Rob, I see you mentioned foundation grants and scholarships. Do you mean go and apply for grants from other foundations for our work and think about ways to channel that into research projects?
No. So I do a substantial amount of work with ISC Squared, the CISSP people. And I'm actually a judge for several scholarships they offer. So every year they offer a scholarship for undergraduate students, for graduate students, and then they a couple of years ago added one for women in cybersecurity. And I see they've added a couple other categories for more diverse things. So basically, the OpenSSF theoretically could set aside some money and have a contest and have applicants submit their project ideas or what their area of research they're going to study to further open source security, and we could have a panel of luminaries review that and try to fund some research. That's been very successful in kind of the ISC Square world, and it might be something we can consider here.
Yeah, I'm particularly fond of the idea of looking at this as a way to look at enhancing the diversity of our environment. There's Cisco recently, in fact, I'll drop a link here, said they'll dedicate 150 million towards cybersecurity academic work in the HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Tremendous gift, and they should get some recognition for that. And I wonder if there's ways to support those kinds of efforts, you know, and look for folks in that who might focus specifically on supply chain kinds of questions and you know, trusting trust kinds of research, or even just, you know, student projects, you know, student-led projects that are kind of, you know, very close to kind of the idea of the mentorship kind of work, but might be more, you know, during the academic year or tied to their school assignments or something. We at Hyperledger, we tried some direct outreach to folks like Howard University and others, and that might have been that the topic of blockchain technology was still either esoteric or very driven by the cryptocurrency kind of nuts. So it was sometimes like hard to find the message that wove through those kind of two big kind of problems. And it could be that this would be much easier to engage with folks like that. Yeah, maybe that's the right thing to kind of put some resources towards, is relationships with that, or women in cybersecurity, or you know, other similar efforts, and outside of the United States and Europe too, supporting initiatives. I'm really intent to see this project be a global effort. Other thoughts?
So I think we've hit on some really interesting ideas here. I think so. My next question is, so what should be the next steps here? Certainly the TAC has a task at hand very soon to come up with this list for the governing board. But all these other great ideas, like how do we want to keep moving this momentum forward? Should we?
Well, I know the time
is this meeting or something.
I know the time is pretty short. And you know, this is not to short circuit other processes that I expect to happen over 2022, where it comes to saying, you know, how do we identify and reward promising ideas and other types of prioritization. This is not the only opportunity to express, you know, here's a place that could use some resources. I'm just trying to get in place for the December approval, and for 2022, rough parameters, you know, big size of the bread box kinds of things. And so I would say for this group, I mean, we've collected a lot of good ideas here. If something occurs to you over the next week or two, say by the end of next week, as something that you think should be highlighted or resourced beyond what you think we would otherwise hear about, let us know. We are going to take, just between David and Jory and myself, just our swig at what we think represents the best balance of interests across all this. Won't be able to cover everybody's wish lists, and probably not even most people's, you know, top 3 priorities or that kind of thing, but we'll do our best. We'll, like I said, we're going to the individual working groups as well. I think the other thing that we could use would be a sense from the TAC, and that could be from you individually to us, of what does success look like by the end of 2022? Because one of the things we'll develop with the governing board is what are our goals for 2022? What do we want to look back and say, as I've said, with the wind at our back, with enough resources, and with, you know, the White House saying this is an important thing, what will we look back on at the end of 2022 and go, yeah, we appropriately took advantage of the opportunity. We didn't whiff the ball on that. Not to say we're going to solve all, you know, exploits or anything like that, but like, what can we be proud of? And the sense from the TAC on that, as a big picture thing, I think would be really helpful as we work on this. So, and that, I mean, the sooner you can get that to us, the better. Individually to us, it doesn't have to represent the collective vision of the TAC, that the sooner the better, because we have to kind of ship this deck, you know, if not end of next week, beginning of the week after. So that's going to be something. The earlier we can get that, the better.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds great.
But this has been extraordinarily helpful.
No, thank you for coming and giving all the background and sharing your vision. I know a lot of us are very excited to have you on board and have this more concrete direction. I'm very excited to see, you know, how OpenSSF is going to progress, you know, from here on out. So Do folks have any other comments, concerns, questions before we move on to our next topic? Nope, all good. Okay. All right. Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. So the next topic is SIG-Store and OpenSSF. So Luke and Dan, you are
sure. Yeah. I'm going to try to share. Ah, crap. Did that work?
I can see your screen.
Oh, sorry. I hope you didn't hear me swear there. I thought Zoom.
We'll make it.
Went to a small. Excuse my French. Okay, so yeah, leading nicely into SIG-Store. I will touch upon why we're here, what was kind of the reason for having this discussion. I'm going to do a quick whiz through. Okay, I think most of you are familiar with SIG-Store. If not, I could always field some questions afterwards. Most of you are experts already in supply chain security, so I don't need to tell you about the big scary stuff. We had this Sona type 650% that came out. It's very useful, coming out just before KubeCon. Okay, and SIG-Store, if we had to encapsulate what we do, okay, what's our kind of our vision, our call to action, we've sort of borrowed from a good idea of let's encrypt here. So there was a time where HTTP was the standard setup for most websites and so forth. And getting a certificate was a kind of a bit of a cumbersome process. You had to kind of contact a provider, credit card, prove your identity, get some sort of a CA bundle back, work out how to get it to work on your web server. And then Let's Encrypt came along and they disrupted that whole space, okay? And they made it so that HTTPS became the common deployment model. So TLS was widely available on most sites because they provide simple to use tools and they provided a free service. And the paradigms are quite similar with software at the moment. The amount of software that's packaged that is unsigned is predominantly the larger model that's out there. So we want to disrupt that space so that artifacts that are part of the supply chain, the common go-to model is that it's signed, there's provenance, there's non-repudiation, you can perform an attestation around the source and so forth. So that's our kind of core vision within SIG-Store. The project started, I guess, just about 1.5 years ago. We're in the Linux Foundation. We got a temporary home there while we tried to find our feet and sort of worked on developing the technology. But since then, things have really taken off much better than we expected. So our contribution graphs have gone through the roof. We've got 20 different organizations that are involved and actively utilizing SIG-Store, and they plan to use this in an enterprise context. And we also have our sort of our public service as well. We're running a kind of like a soft launch at the moment. So we have a transparency log, and that's, I think it's just getting up to 800,000 log entries that are in there now. And people are putting all sorts of stuff in there. We've got all kinds of communities. Arch Linux are doing some stuff around binary transparency. There's lots of container signatures in there. There's other ecosystems that are trying stuff out, such as Ruby and some of the Rust community starting to look at SIG-Store. So the community's blown up, and we've got a really lovely community now. We've got a Slack channel with, I think, about 800 people in there at the moment. And so it's really caught fire over the past year. A bit hand-wavy, this one, but essentially what we do is we provide free, short-lived certificates. Okay, so these certificates allow you to fix an identity to a sign-in event that occurred at a specific time. Okay, and you can sort of map that to a digest. So we use these different technologies. We have we've got our Fulcio, which is our certificate signing system. We've got Recall, which is our transparency log. And then we have multiple tools, but one of our sort of killer application tools so far is CoSign, which has really helped rocket off our ability to sign containers and utilize OCI registries. And really, this whole sort of ecosystem allows you to cryptographically verify provenance of any particular artifact. Okay, you have this captured in an immutable append-only transparency log, that's backed by a CA authority. And the CA authority was actually bootstrapped in the open. So it's a group of people. It's a mix of academia and corporate. So we had Marina Moore from NYU, Santiago, who some of you know from Purdue and in Toto. And then there was some of us folks from Google and Red Hat. So it's a nice mix of people that bootstrapped our sort of root of trust, essentially. And again, I'm going to kind of skip over this. This is kind of getting into our sort of keyless technology. But what we do in SigStore, we can cater to everybody. So you might have somebody that has their YubiKey or a HSM. They want to manage their own key. They can use SigStore. You might have somebody that has a key management service. So we support Azure, AWS, GCP, KMS. Okay, so your kind of enterprise customer, they might want to utilize that. Somebody that just doesn't want to manage keys, which is predominantly the largest group in open source at the moment. People are just, the adoption is incredibly poor around people generating and maintaining their own keys. We have this keyless technology, which is where we have these short-lived keys, and we utilize the transparency log to snap a moment in time around the sort of trust delegations that are at play there. So again, I'm going to skip over this a little bit more in the interest of time. We're getting a bit more hand wavy into the technology here. Co-sign, as I said, this is our container signing tool. This has started to be leveraged a lot in Kubernetes, and many projects starting to leverage this as well as part of their creating their own release container images. And again, we utilize either KMS or we have our certificate authority, Fulcio. And all of the trust is immutably pinned to our transparency log. And this is all run in public at the moment, so you can use this service. So kind of what we're looking at doing next is we're expanding on our container signing. We're looking to onboard several communities. So we're working with Ruby Gems, the Python Foundation, starting to speak to the WASM folks, starting to speak to the Rust community, because at the moment Rust are putting everything in untrusted. There's lots and lots. I can't keep up with it, the stuff that's happening around SBOM. There's a lot of tools that generate SBOM that are starting to integrate with SigStore. We can do in toto attestations. Sorry, I always have a problem saying that. In toto attestations, SPDX types. There's a whole hive of activity that's happening around SBOM at the moment. And we have these policy bundles, so we can do sort of offline type verification as well. So we're looking to improve the UX as well around verification, okay? And there's people that are starting to leverage policy engines. So there's admission controllers that are being built on top of the SigStore infrastructure for Tecton and various other sort of CI type systems. GitHub is a really interesting one. We can do this really cool unattended signing within GitHub Actions now, which is really exciting. And yeah, we're starting to sort of improve the whole UX now, because we have the infrastructure starting to really mature now, and it's starting to hit a lot of 1.0 releases. So as you see, Recore GA, Fulcio GA. So Recore's at 1.0 now. We're starting to nudge Fulcio towards 1.0. One of our main clients, Co-Sign, is 1.0, okay? And we can also provide a trust root for our projects, which is an interesting thing. And Purdue University is starting to work on some monitors that will perform a kind of a cryptographic audit of the structure of our transparency logs, so that they can be sure that there's no untoward behavior, any sort of manipulation of the log that's happened. So with a transparency log, it's anybody that's interested, it's a Merkle tree. And with a Merkle tree, you can do something like that's called an inclusion proof. So you can calculate the structural integrity of the tree, and then look for a particular part of that tree which maps to perhaps an artifact, and then compute an inclusion proof to make sure that nobody's tampered with it. So that's what's coming up next. And around the public service, so in SigStore, we have the community who are working on the code. Those are the folks that are maintaining the code and getting in touch with different communities to look to onboard those communities. But then we also have the public service. Okay, and the plan is that this will be run under the Linux Foundation. Okay, just a few sort of, a few people that have said some nice things about us. So Josh, we spoke to him quite early from Let's Encrypt. He's always been a big fan of what we're doing, and various other people. Chris Wright, so Wired Magazine covered us, which was really nice. And but anyhow, and KubeCon. So we recently had KubeCon. Again, there was a lot of really nice attention that we got there. We had our own booth stall, and lots of people come up to inquire about Sigstore. And it appeared in a lot of talks because, as you know, supply chain was a big topic at KubeCon. So at the moment, we're looking to launch the public service, because, as I said, at the moment we're under a soft launch. So we have two phases that we have here. So phase one is what we're in at the moment, okay, and people are starting to fund us for this, and this will be where we have a developer relations engineer who will help manage the onboarding of communities, okay, and we need a security audit. So a security audit will be performed against a threat analysis against our architecture and our code, okay, and a marketing budget, and that's where we are at the moment. So that's funding that's actively happening as we speak. Phase two is where we are fully GA. We'll provide a full guaranteed operational service, which is what we'll be moving into next. And this is anticipated to be early 2022. So this is where we provide guarantees. We have site reliability engineers. So there's a service outage, somebody's got a pager, and then we have hosting costs. And again, we've been able to benefit from the experience of Let's Encrypt here, who run a similar sort of operation. So you might be interested in why are we talking to the OpenSSF? Obviously, you know myself and Dan through the TAC. Essentially, what we're looking to do is look at how we can either two possible routes closely more align with the OpenSSF, or in some way bring Sigstore into the OpenSSF. Because it's one of the things that we heard during the phase one was a lot of folks said, love Sigstore, really support it. Have you thought about being in the OpenSSF? It's a common thing that comes up quite a lot. And originally when we started Sigstore, we always sort of had this in mind, but at the time the OpenSSF was very new, it was non-funded, and we were still trying to find our feet as a community and an organization. So it now seems that the sort of the good juncture to start to make folks aware of what we're thinking. And we've been starting to discuss this with Brian as well, who seems quite excited about Sigstore, if that's fair to say, Brian. And yeah, so it's really to sort of, I know time is ticking on, so I'll conclude to allow you to ask some questions if you have. And if you want to know more about the technology, we probably can't really do too much on the tech at the moment, but encourage you to get in contact and we can discuss it further. Okay, I now need to work out how to stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you, Luke. That was really awesome. Yeah, I can certainly say I'm excited about Sigstore. I'd love to see it in OpenSSF as well. I think there's a lot of compatibility there as we keep talking about supply chain and these new initiatives, and seeing those two work together would be really, really cool. Curious, want to hear others' opinions as well, concerns about that. I mean, anything at all?
I mean, Luke, you kind of hinted at this already, but I know a lot of us wrote big checks for OpenSSF right now. And so I'd certainly love to see if we could find a way to leverage the funding we've got in OpenSSF to make Sigstore work. Having that as a separate project, I think made sense at the time. We should really evaluate whether it continues to make sense going forward. Because I think I think most of the companies on the call would love to have this be part of our major supply chain attack mitigation. But it's definitely hard for us to all go and invest in having presence on multiple boards and all that. So
yeah, I understood. Yeah, and yeah, we've heard that often, and that's understandable. Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So in regards to that, I mean, I think that's a very valid point as well. Like there's a lot of money flowing into OpenSSF already. Luke, have you guys performed the task of estimating budget requirements of what you might need, make the assumption that you're in OpenSSF? What would that ask look like as far as operational budget?
Okay, so we did a cursory investigation here, so don't hold me to this figure, but we looked at what the LF, what their costs were, and I'd need to revisit this, but it was approximately around 1 million. So
that's an annual.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Now,
But,
how much of that is cloud and such, or could be supported by
I would
cloud
need to
service?
dig it out. Yeah, it was a while ago that we worked on this. So, and there is room to, you know, I don't want to sort of put that out there as a definite figure. So we sort of loosely base this off what we got from ISRG and their Amazon costs and their, you know, their engineer costs. And so it's by no means, we're talking a loose ballpark here.
No, that's fair. My reason for asking is not so much for the specific figures, but more along the lines of, if we were to move this into OpenSSF, have we thought about that? Because then the next question would be budget, right?
Sure, yeah.
Right.
And that this is a hard thing to answer because I mean it is largely not cloud costs or things that are easy to get for free potentially or donated from other resources. It does come down to having a tier one set of site reliability engineers, essentially folks who can dive in and fix a problem the moment it starts happening, you know, and getting coverage around the clock, and with somebody who understands actually the application well enough to respond to novel attacks on it or novel problems with it, right? Not just the steady state. You don't need those people at all. The problem is when you need them now. And it I don't know if there's some opportunity to look at the architecture to make it resilient in the face of central services being down or something like that. Like maybe there's something to think about there to make it a little more cooperative in terms of the infrastructure, or less dependent upon, you know, if it can handle a 6-hour outage without people, you know, freaking out and the world coming to an end, then maybe the pricing can be different too. Sure. I think if the TAC agrees that this is something that they like, something that's important to support, the next step on our side would be talk to Josh Ayas and the folks at ISRG to figure out what does something like this look like, but it be an iterative process to try to come up with something that both is a reasonable number and a reasonable set of compromises on the service, you know, to have something that can fit within a budget, right? And I don't know what that looks like yet, but before we went too far down that path, I think getting the nod from the TAC is an important thing to do. In terms of budgeting for December, you know, Luke and I and everyone should talk a little bit more about this. We could probably earmark a bit. I know Luke has also gotten some independent funding for this. It started to, at least. So I think there's enough there to do something impactful. Getting $1 million is a big chunk, at least, of what we've got committed already. But if we tied it to some fundraising for this, maybe even there's a way to have, you know, some of the recipients of the signatures do a tip jar kind of thing, or some other type of model to help support the funding of this. I don't know, but I know these kinds of infrastructure services are hard to figure out how to do in a way that meets everyone's expectations for how internet services work these days.
And it was a very cursory, quickly hashed out number. David, I probably remember we worked on this.
Right, so I do.
Really don't take that figure and note it down in your pad. It's yeah. It was,
yeah, I didn't even include the number in the notes, but I think it's important to note it's not $1 billion and it's not 10.
Yeah.
Before you go, Luke.
Brian said this will be a critical service, so you know, it does require. I mean, one of the things that we've for our 1.0 with the transparency log, we've been working on sharding, which is an approach for if something, you know, of a huge magnitude happens that we need to refresh the infra, we can do that.
Cool. So in the spirit of time, we have 2 minutes left, unfortunately.
But before we go, Luke, can we get you to post the URL to the slide deck?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
that. And then do we want to consider this as a formal proposal right now that the TAC can vote on to say, yes, we'd like to have it in OpenSSF, or do folks feel like they need another presentation or time to think about it? It seems like there's general agreement here, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
You could maybe have something to signify you have an interest, perhaps. Yeah, I mean,
and I think there could be a separation between voting to have the code and the brand in OpenSSF with still some unresolved questions about how the service is deployed. Kind of splitting it out that way might be one way for the TAC to express its kind of governance over the technical, what goes on technically in the project, right? And it's really more down to the code and the idea.
So perhaps next steps in about we create an issue as we've done in the past for comments and voting on GitHub, and then we can kind of brainstorm on there and people can show their support, and then we can kind of move on from that. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds okay.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. I know there was one more mention in the agenda around the voting process. I'm working with Jory and Brian on that. We'll send out details once we have more to explore there, but the goal is to have that process figured out by the November 5th governing board meeting as well. If folks have questions, concerns, or advice, please feel free to reach out. And I think that is it. So with that, channels are open, but otherwise we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. And thank you, everyone. It was a great meeting today.